Hello and welcome back to Crafty Magic Arts. What does a grizzly bear, a moose, and a Canadian goose all have in common? That's right, they're Canadian! Yay! So we're going to go to Thingiverse and look up moose, and then we're going to look up bear, and then we're going to look up goose. The files are all looking pretty darn good, similar enough at least. Bear's looking sharp. And the goose is not a Canadian goose, but we'll make it work. Now it's time to bring all these files together. Here is the moose looking a little sideways, but I fixed that up and pull him in. And then I want to look at the bear and the goose. The sizing is actually very appropriate for the animals, but this has to change. But before we do that, let's actually look at the differences in the points, and whoa, there is a discrepancy here. You can see the moose has much less than the other animals, and that will also need to change. So let's get into it. I cut up the animals and resized them, and you can actually see that the bear is a lot more bearish, I guess, bigger. But we do need these animals to actually work together, so here I am. I've sculpted them to make it actually work. And you can see that everything's aligning a lot better. And then I slip on the goose, and the goose is looking a little bit more Canadian goose at this point. Using the sculpting tools, I managed to make that as well. Here I am, the animals are all together. Now I actually need to make them one. So I'm actually going to join them together. So what this does is it actually makes all of them a single piece, and then I can sew the pieces together. And how I do that is very slow and very tedious. I simply grab one point at a time, and then I merge them together at center. In order to make this work, I did have to add points as I went because of the discrepancies, but it was doable, and it was incredibly time consuming. But here it is, it's done, and it is ready to be printed, and I am printing it actually on my Anycubic Cobra. And this actually will print it at the largest size. I would have loved to do resin, but my resin printer is quite small, and I would never have been able to get the size I really wanted. And you can see here it's slowly printing out, and it's printing out beautifully. It was a longer print than anticipated. I think it was calculated at 15 hours, and it took 30. But here it is done, and it's looking really, really good. Now it's just a matter of getting it off the build plate, which is simple enough because the build plate is removable. Bring it over to my crafting desk, and now it's actually time to get it off. And it's proving to be a little challenging. I have to bend the build plate, and there we go. Build plate is clean. So this was a near perfect print, but I do have to say that I made a very big mistake when it came to the supports. I double layered them, so they were so strong. Great for printing, bad for removing. It took an enormous amount of effort, but I did actually manage to salvage this print and get all the supports off. It was a fight though. And as you can see, it left a lot of scraps, but I'll deal with those later. While the supports were good, I didn't actually do really good, I think it's called interfacing between the supports and the model, so there was a ton of like weird things going on. This did require some filling, and then I actually didn't like the lines as well, so I added a ton of filling in the underside as well as the top to make sure the layer lines weren't as noticeable. This is my modeling compound. I've used this for dozens of things, and now I just need to make sure I sand it nicely. First I sand the feet, which actually removed plastic as well as the compound, and then I moved on to sanding the body. I'm using all kinds of sanding paper here. I got my thin one, I got my nail file, and then also I just rip off strips to get into all the details. I want to make sure that I'm actually capturing all those details without it noticeably being a 3D print. Now what actually felt like forever in terms of sanding, I'm actually able to gesso my piece. I'm using black gesso because a lot of the piece is going to be quite dark, and I want to make sure that's coming through naturally in the color. And then after gessoing, I'm moving on to painting. I'm using my brown here, which is really dark. It's actually really hard to see against the black, but it is brown. It is actually brown. And it's got really good coverage. This is my golden matte acrylic, which I absolutely love. But I do need to move on to my craft paint because I have a lot of other colors that I need to incorporate. This whole time I am using reference to make sure that I'm actually viewing what these animals look like. So the colors bounce back and forth as I want to make sure that it's capturing as closely as possible. The goose has got a nice like light chest, and then it's got the black head, which I'm actually painting black, not just leaving gessoed. And then I'm going to be adding a lot of tan. So there is a lot of tan throughout the whole piece. This is just the antlers, which is like the perfect color almost. But I actually do have a lot of other colors I need to mix and mingle into this piece. So I actually need to make it myself. And here I am mixing it. You will notice I add a red to every single one, and that's just to make sure that is carried through as like a through line for color through the entire piece. So the red is an undertone that I want carried across the entire piece. And now you can see that I'm actually painting the belly quite dark, and here's my references I'm using. I noticed that bears and moose both have really dark undersides. So I want to make sure that I'm incorporating that into the entire design, and then actually thinking about like what bears have as far as color goes. They have dark legs as well, a nice light face, and so do mooses. So I want to make sure that I carry that through as well. They're actually very similar in color palette, which was really nice. The goose is a different story, but the moose and the bear, that was nice. So it was nice and easy. Now the gray was the wrong color to actually make the goose, but it was a really good starting line. So here I'm actually blending in the tan brown into the goose from the gray into the back of the moose and bear. And then I'm actually blending down some cream into the back legs of the moose, because the moose, they actually have quite light legs, which is really nice because it ties really well into the goose, which I did not plan that, but it worked really well. So now you can actually see the colors are nicely blended, and I have a ton of like coverage throughout the entire piece. It actually carries over as if it's one piece. It turns out I was missing a color, so I actually make a new color, and then I move on to sketching the wings. Now, so I will say that the wings were actually incredibly intimidating, and it took me a really long time to actually sit down and do this because I knew that it would be incredibly time consuming if I was going to do it correctly. So here I am adding dark color, and then I'm blending in a lighter color at the edge of the wing. I'm looking at references the entire time to make sure that it will look like a Canadian goose's wing. And you can actually see that it's a very slow process. This is real time, and I'm taking my time adding all these pieces. And I also want to make sure both sides match. So I finish one side and then I go back to the other. And here it is mostly done. I'm pretty happy with how the blending all came out and how it actually looks like a goose's wing. Like I said, I was so intimidated, but I'm really happy with the outcome here. Now it's time for me to paint the face of the goose. I have sketched on a line and then I follow through. This is a cream color. I do change it to white later, but I don't show it on camera. Now I want to add some details. Both moose and bear have really dark eyes, so simply just coloring them in black is sufficient for this design. And then also I want to make sure that I capture the nose of the bear, making sure that he looks really cute. And now here's something different. So I lost a lot of texture when I moved the bear and the moose together, because the moose had very little texture and the bear had a lot. So I actually smoothed it out in Blender. So to capture some of that texture I lost, I actually sketched on some fur. It's not really noticeable, but to me it is. So it's actually really nice. So you can actually see like the fur kind of like lightly sketched onto the bear, which is really nice with those pencils. And here's the color in its completed state. I will say that at this point, I'm happy with the way things look and I want to call it done. Now it's time to actually gloss the eyes. I've actually added eye shine onto the eyes prior to adding the gloss, but I didn't capture that on video because it was incredibly detailed work and I had to get like super close to my face. But here I am adding the gloss to all 6 of the eyes of the moose, bear, and goose. And making sure they're all nice and shiny. I also add a little bit of gloss to the beak of the goose because they actually have a natural kind of shine and it's really nice. So I promise we come back to all those support pieces, and here's my solution. My toaster oven's outside on my deck, slowly melting all the pieces into this glass mold with parchment paper, and it is looking really weird, but it works. And here it is all together. Now this looks like a lump of plastic because it is, and man is it solid and man is it heavy. It is going nowhere. It is firm. And it will make a perfect base for a Canadian Chimera. Here I'm using some wall filler that I had left over. It's literally already like fading. It's supposed to be pink and it's not, so I'm using it. It was actually a mistake. It took forever for it to dry, and then I make the mistake of adding more of this stuff to it. This is different kind of compound. It's a polyfill that I got. It was speed dry. It took forever for everything to dry, but I just layer on more and more stuff. And I just have to wait it out. I actually ended up poking like light holes into it, I think, to help. But here is my big mistake. I added like a thick layer. This is speed dry for like thin coats. So it took forever and it didn't look good. So I ended up adding like some foam clay that I had extra, and I added that instead. And you can see I actually pressed in the feet of the Canadian Chimera, and then I added brown to it to make it work. Now I'm speeding through this because it's not very interesting to see brown be painted, but it is like different shades of brown to make sure that it looks more like ground. And then I now am bringing out the good stuff. And this is all of my basing material, which I got a long time ago. I want to say for when I made my mantar. And now it's time for me to actually make this work. So here I am adding some glue all. I'm not going into the feet area because I don't want that to be disrupted. I'm adding some homemade gravel, aka I got it from my front yard, and then also adding some twigs, which I'm just making look a little bit more natural by adding a tiny bit more brown. They are natural twigs, but they were too light. They gotta fix that. And now with the twigs on, it's time for me to get some bushes ready. Now these are really bright green. It is natural moss according to Michael's, but they were far too dark. So I originally was just painting them with my bare hands, got some gloves on, and I went to town. I'm using some dark green and I'm just mushing in there. So just smacking around different colors of green. I don't want it to be like just uniform, so I'm using like some more earthy green. And then now that that's all done and drying, I'm going to make the grass. So I'm not using any fancy static grass. This is just some stuff I got from Michael's. I also added some other stuff that I cut up last time with my mantar. It creates a little bit of variation, and then even some like cut up yarn in there. And now I'm actually gluing everything down. I put some hot glue on, and then I also have some regular PVA glue there to make sure that it actually stays long term. Hot glue's good for short term for some stuff. My hot glue seems to last longer than that, but that's okay. Now it's time to add the bushes. I've added a lot already, and you can see I added some PVA glue, and then I also added hot glue. So again, I want to make sure that it's actually able to last the test of time. Using my tweezers, I am placing the rocks nicely and making sure they're actually sticking to the ground using hot glue. And then I'm going to add in some PVA glue to make sure they stick later. And here's the base mostly done. It's not done yet because I do want to add some paint. I am adding on a number of colors onto my little tile there. There's a variety, and in between I am adding layers of paint, but I didn't want you to watch me go through that whole process. And here I am mixing just the right color that I need to make sure the ground is looking good. So here I am dry brushing it onto the piece. I actually really like the colors that I have on the ground, on the sand, all that stuff. I like the natural colors, so I'm not actually going to paint them. I know some creators do, but I actually really like it just as is. And now we're done. Here is the Canadian Chimera, also known as Celine. Honestly, they all have their own names. So Fox is the bear, Gretzky's the moose, and Dion is the Canadian goose. All Canadian all around, but they are the Canadian Chimera, and together they're known as Celine. Yes, they have their own uniform, one name, and then they all individually have their own name too. So I hope you really like this piece. And this was inspired by my son. He had a bit of a brainchild, which I took and ran with. That actually is going to be coming to life as well in an upcoming video. But here is the Canadian Chimera. I am planning on making this model available on Thingiverse, and it will be available for free for those who wish to download and print themselves. If you do print it, just let me know. I'd love to see it. I hope you liked this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And be sure to ring the bell notifications as well so you can see my next upcoming video. Thanks. Bye.